I am Miranda Buford. I'm the Director of Communications for Upper Darby School District. Thank you guys for joining us tonight for our first Parent Information Night. Tonight we have Dr. Babatunde Odusami here from Widener University. He is a professor of finances, right, Dr. Odusami?
Yes.
He works with students in Delaware County. And he has graciously, through Zach Casavo, who is one of our counselors at one of our local elementary schools, agreed to come in to provide this resource. So without further ado, we're going to get started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miranda, for introducing me again. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts about retirement planning. It's something that I care very much about. Obviously, I work with finance, I work with investments, I work with people that make retirement decisions. I actually sit on a committee that makes retirement decisions for people as well. So it's something that I think about a whole lot, and I should, because that's part of my work. And so what I want to do tonight is just share some of my thoughts and some of the things that I've been kind of delving through and trying to understand, well, what is the best way to kind of plan for retirement, right? We know that, again, what I'm going to do is more very generalized, because again, everyone's situation is different. Some people have, 2 kids, 1 kid. Some people are, single family. So what I'm saying is that our situations are different. So I'll try to generalize, but also try to be as specific as I can. So again, what I want to do tonight is kind of share some thoughts about little steps you can do to kind of hopefully make retirement those last, those years where you tend to you sit back to reap the fruit of all the work you've done, of raising children if you have one, of going to work 9 to 5, making that period of where you have to reap that reward much more fruitful. And so, through life, we go through different phases, right? And as we go through different phases, our goals, our financial goals evolve. When you're in your 20s, you're going to have short-term goals, you're going to have long-term goals. My hope is that everyone in the 20s start to think about retirement, because we say something in finance that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time to plant a tree is actually today. So if you really want to plan for retirement, the best time to start planning is when you don't need it, which the earlier you start, the better, which is in your 20s. But there are other priorities you're going to have as well. You're going to have things like maybe saving to buy a house, saving to buy a car. If you plan to have children, or you have children already, or little ones, you would start saving for college as well. As you go into your 30s and 40s, retirement is still not your immediate need. It's somewhere on the horizon. So you're still going to still planning. As a matter of fact, the most crucial time to start focusing on retirement, if you haven't done that, the last window of opportunity to kind of make it easier to achieve your desired goal for retirement is really your 30s and 40s. After the 40s, it becomes a little bit more challenging, because there's not much time left to do that. So your long-term goal, again, at that point, is still retirement. Your short-term goals will be, probably, for those that have kids early, in your 20s or so, your kids are probably getting to that point where you start thinking about going to college and how to pay for college. Once you get into your 60s, retirement is on you. And at that point, it's really not planning per se. It's more like, how do I make sure the period of my retirement itself goes along to the plan that I've made? So you're planning for how to spend the money, and if you have people that that depend on you, how to support them when you're no longer around. So that's really the kind of the general sense where everyone tends to, or at least the bulk of people tend to think about some of these issues as we grow over time. Now you might say, well, why retirement? Well, why should I focus on retirement? Well, if you imagine yourself as an asset, as an investment, right? Early on in your life, when you're in your 20s, the most important asset you have is time. You have time to learn new skills. You have time to plan for retirement. You have time to do all kinds of things that you want to do, like time to travel, trying to do all those things. So you do have some asset. What you see is that your financial asset, that is how much stock of money or wealth you have, will be very low at that time. For most of us, it might actually be negative, right? But as we start to work, gain experience, get promoted, become expert at whatever we do, and it doesn't have to be an white collar job, whatever kind of job it is. You get better at it over time. If you're a carpenter, you become a master carpenter somewhere in your late 20s. If an electrician, you become a master electrician or master plumber. So you get better, you get more pay, you become more valuable. And And that value rises, and that's pretty much the red line I'm showing you. That's the value of your capital starts to rise once you get into your 40s. For most people, it's around your late 40s is where their capital tends to peak. That human capital is what I'm trying to say. So what we do over time is that we're constantly trading. As we save for retirement, what we're basically doing is we're putting away a portion of our human capital, and we're converting that portion of our human capital into financial capital, with the intention that when we get to our 60s, as you can see from the red line, in our 60s, the bulk of our human capital is already used up. Even if you want to work, sometimes our physical, strength is just not there to work, right? Or, sometimes we do see some level of age discrimination as well, where people that are older, when they lose their job, they find it very hard to get another job. And so by the time you get into our 60s or so, the bulk of our human capital is already used up. At that point, the primary source of supporting ourselves, at least from our own kind of work, will be the financial capital we've set aside while we're still extremely valuable from an human capital point of view. So, and you can see for most people, as a matter of fact, in their late 40s, if they started making those investments early in life, their financial capital would overtake their human capital. And so that their wealth will be mostly driven in their 50s and into their 60s by their financial capital, not their human capital. By the time you get into your 50s, you will make more money. If you started saving early, you'll be making more money from your financial capital than you'll be making from your actual work. And that goes on until you retire. And now what happens after you retire is all depends on you, on your spending. If you this is just, by the way, an hypothetical one. For most people, they might spend most of their financial capital and keep spending it until whenever they die, which could be as late as over 100 or whatever it is. So what you see is that your financial capital for most people will peak around the late 60s, and then once you start to spend it, they spend it all, and hopefully the goal is that they outlive that financial capital. So what I'm trying to point here is that it's very important to start planning for for how you support yourself in your 60s when you still have means to grow that resources. And so the best time to start putting away things for your, putting away money or putting away resources for your 60s is when you have human capital you can exchange for financial capital. When I say exchange, essentially you're investing, you're putting some money away. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move further down into this conversation. So what I want to do next is kind of share some elements of what a retirement plan should look like. Like if I'm thinking about retirement, what are the things I need to consider, right? It's because everyone, when they think about retirement, you say, well, I'm going to buy a boat, I'm going to travel around the world, I'm going to move to whatever it is, right? That's what most people think about retirement. But retirement really planning does cover much more than that. So the first thing you think about when thinking about retirement is really how much time do I have left? Because how much time you have left would really determine to what extent what you need to do to achieve your retirement goal. The more time you have, the easier it would be for you to achieve whatever goals you want to achieve. And that's just reality. No matter how small the goal is, no matter how big it is, the more time you have to achieve it, the easier it will be to achieve it. The second thing is, how long do I actually really think I would be in retirement, right? For most people, the average life expectancy in the United States is roughly around 80 something years or so. So if you plan to retire, say in 65 or something like that, most people will probably leave for another 25 years in retirement. And so it's a long time. It's almost like a quarter of one's lifetime will be spent on average in retirement. So it's not a trivial amount of time. Most people don't really think about it like that, but it's really not. It's a lot. It's a really significant amount of time that most people will expect to spend in retirement. So that's the first thing you have to think about. How much time do I have left, and how much time do I expect to be in retirement? Those two things would help you determine what the next layer of your plan will be. So the next thing you have to start thinking about is, what do I need to support the lifestyle I want to live in retirement? What are my retirement spending needs? And be aware that your retirement spending needs will be driven by the kind of, first thing, like I said, the lifestyle you plan to live. Is it going to be an active lifestyle where you're constantly traveling, or you're involved in all kinds of interesting things, or you pick up a new hobby? Or is it going to be just a very modest lifestyle where, you know, I just want to be there for my kids or my grandchildren. I want to take them out, maybe babysit for my kids and visit my nephews, my niece, my brother, and my sisters. Just, you know, well, I want to go around the world, right? I want to maintain membership of a golf club or whatever, something like that. So those are all the kind of things I have to start thinking about early on. You know, do I plan to carry some debt when I retire, or do I want to be debt free by retirement? It doesn't matter, because what happens is that most debt often come with fixed expenses. Right? If you have a mortgage in retirement, those mortgage will not go away, nor will they reduce. It will just stay for the most part, unless you refinance it, by the way. But if you have a mortgage by the time you retire, you're going to have this fixed expense that you have to come up with every month, you know, whether you have money or not. But if you say, well, my plan is that by the time I get to retirement, I don't want to have any debts, because I want to have very little debt, so that way I'm not strained by that. So that's a choice you have to start making right now. And as a matter of fact, I've made those choices myself right now. The next thing you have to think about is, well, what would my medical expense need will look like? And that all depends on, you know, your current and your family medical history, right? What kind of family medical history do you have? And again, it doesn't mean that's what's going to happen to you, but I always tell people it's always better to have an umbrella and not have rain, right? Than to get caught up in the rain without having an umbrella to cover your head. So it's important to start planning for those things now. If those kind of situations does exist in one's history. Again, so it depends on the kind of work that you do. If you work in an industry that does require a lot of physical exhaustion, where maybe you're working like construction or any kind of occupation that does have some kind of occupational hazard, you might want to start thinking about, well, how would that impact me when I retire? Would I have additional medical costs that an average retiree would not have? We'll talk a little bit about cost later on. Now I realize I'm speaking a little bit fast, so just stop me. Or give me a signal if you want to ask questions. I'll be happy to do that as well. Now, the other aspect of retirement you have to start thinking about, and it's always important to start thinking about this since early. Again, one thing that I've experienced is that oftentimes the most difficult time to get something, especially when it comes to finance, is when you need it. And so you always want to pre-plan those things before you eventually need those things. So the next bullet point is really your legacy. If you have a spouse, how do you expect your spouse to get taken care of if you're no longer around? For most people, it's actually, on an average cost, on a per person cost basis, it's actually cheaper to have, to live with two persons than to live with one person. Because if you have two persons living in a house, it's still one house, right? It is still one electricity bill. It's still all kind of stuff, right? If you now go down from 2% to 1%, for the most part, some of those costs don't go away. They still stay the same, right? But now on a per person basis, that becomes a much higher cost. So it's very important to start thinking about, how do I plan to support those that depend on me or those that rely on me when I'm no longer around? And more importantly, how should my assets and liabilities be handled when I'm not here? I think everyone's probably know that if you don't have any specified instruction as to how those things will be divvied up, in some states, exactly the state will actually step in and do those things on your behalf when you're no longer here. So it's always important to start thinking about how you want to take care of your loved ones when you're no longer around, and what should happen to whatever commitment that you have or whatever asset that you have when you're no longer around as well. So that's just the first 3 steps. And those are probably the easier ones, so to say. The next set of questions or elements of the retirement plan is, we talk about spending, right? But spending itself cannot occur if there's no income. And so the next question you want to answer is, well, how do I plan to support my retirement spending? How do I plan to fund it? A lot of us talk about, well, I'm going to get to 65 and I'm going to apply for Social Security. That is very common. We're going to talk a little bit more about Social Security in a second, and you'll see how very quickly the Social Security may not be enough for most of us. So that's one option. The other option is, well, maybe right now I'm going to start gathering assets. Remember what I talked about, financial assets? I'm going to start gathering those financial assets now, so that when retirement does come, I'll be able to rely on that. Now, some of us work in businesses or industries where they provide pensions for us. So that may be another thing that we plan to rely on. Or some of us may say, well, you know what, I'm not going to retire. I'm going to keep working until the light goes out. And that's perfectly fine as well. As a matter of fact, what you see in the next couple of minutes is that there are a substantial number of people that actually don't fully retire. And we'll talk a little bit more about those people later on as well. So those are really the 4 key ways, either I'm going to rely on some combination of those four. I'm going to either rely on Social Security primarily, or I'm going to rely on Social Security in combination with some retirement assets, which is probably the more common. For some people, you say, well, I'm just going to keep working, particularly if your occupation does allow you to keep working. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, like I said, in a few minutes. So the last two, remember, income is really just more of, something that comes out on a periodic basis, right? Like salary, every month I get paid, or every 2 weeks, or every 1 week I get paid, right? Now, to generate that kind of cash flow, what we call it in finance, there has to be something that spits out the money, right? And if you go to a bank, you got the ATM has to be there to give you the money, right? So without the ATM, there's no money. So your ATM in retirement will be, with respect to retirement assets, is the investment that you've committed to doing before retirement. So the next element of your retirement plan is, well, how do I accumulate enough assets to spend in retirement, right? More importantly, how do I make sure that asset that I've accumulated does not run out before I die? And for those of us that plan to support people that are not, when we're no longer around, how do I make sure that my assets would not only support me in retirement, make sure I don't run out of it in retirement, and also will be there to support people that depend on me when I'm no longer around. So as you can see, the questions are quite formidable, but they're not impossible if we start thinking about them early in life. Now, the last one is really for those who have a lot of money, which is more of tax planning. What are the best ways to save for retirement that would, be tax efficient? But that's really a question that very wealthy people tend to worry about. For the vast majority of us, it's probably not the main concern. We just want to get through the first five of it. If we can get to the first five of it, we're perfectly fine with not having an immediate answer to the last one. When we have a lot of money in the future, maybe we'll start worrying about the last one. But if you can answer the first five elements of the retirement plan, I think we're off to a great start. I want to stop for a second to take any questions that you might have on those six elements, so to say.
Okay, let me go to participants and allow people to unmute themselves. So if you have any questions, guys, just unmute yourself and ask away. Let me remove the spotlight so everyone can see everybody.
All right, not a problem. Just signal whenever you have the questions. So what I want to do now, I want to go over each of those elements as much as I can. Kind of go into more detail, because one thing about life is that we have expectations, and then there's also reality, right? So what I want to do with the next couple of slides, kind of discuss some what people think and what actually happens based on what we've seen based on data that's been collected over time. Now, yeah, most people actually do plan to retire by 65. And what we see is that it's actually 65 is the average retirement age. However, a substantial number of people actually retire before they're 65. So you can see about a third of women retire by the time they turn 62, about a quarter of men retire by the time they turn 62. But by the time we get to 65, more than half of adults have already retired. As a matter of fact, if you add those that are no longer working because they're disabled, we're looking at almost 60% of adults are out of the workforce by the time they turn 65. Now, currently, the full retirement age based on Social Security for those that are born before 1963 is roughly about 66. And so if you add those group into it as well, notice that by 66, about 90% of adults have already retired. So what I'm trying to say is, in terms of expectation, it's more than likely that you would be retired by the time you turn 66, or the very most, as you can see, only very few people retire by over 67, less than 10%. And so that kind of gives an idea of how much time you have left to plan for retirement. So you can take your desired time, your current age, that lets you know how much time you have. Just be aware that, again, the less time you have, the more costly it would be for you to achieve your retirement goal. So what I'm trying to say is that almost likely the vast majority of us will be retired by the time we are 66 to 67. Be aware, for those born after 1963, the full retirement age is 67 to be eligible for full Social Security. And we'll talk about that later on as well. The next question is, well, what should I expect my spending to look like in retirement? Well, here's what we've seen. Again, this might be aware, this is average. It's not fully reflected of every income group. About, 13% of adults spend about retired adults spend about, on average, adults over 65 spend about 13% of their income on food. Transportation and healthcare is also another one. But the biggest source of expense for adults in retirement is actually housing. And that is mortgage, utilities, and every other services that pertain to where they live. And that's because a lot of adults still have mortgages, even in retirement. So 36% is the most, of your income is what at least people currently in retirement are spending on housing. And the next is followed by healthcare and transportation, because again, a lot of adults also have car notes that they're still paying for. Beyond that, followed by food. Other expenses are, anything that does not fall into this category. It could be, say, membership of the book club, some hobby or passion, something like that. Is really what that 16% is. But the bulk of your expenses would be housing, transportation, healthcare, and food. Now, this is average, and it's often distorted because income distribution in the US is very, very skewed. We have a small group of people that make a lot of money, and we have the vast majority of us that don't make that much. So let's go on to break it down by income group, so you can see hopefully something that's clear to where you are in terms of what people in your income group actually spend on each of those categories. And this is from a survey done by the United States Bureau for Labor Statistics. Notice that again, for those that have income that is less than, say, $30,000 or somewhere around that range, they tend to spend a lot of their income on food and full of and housing, and not a whole lot on other things like, say, transportation and stuff like that. Now, if you look at those that are maybe a typical middle class family, which is somewhere around, say, $40,000 to $60,000, $70,000 or so, so to say, you can see that again, housing still continues to remain a big portion of their expense. Food, by the way, you can see it doesn't change very much. It's still roughly around the same amount across income group. However, you can see that housing starts to rise as the income group also starts to rise as well. Now, the interesting part, if you look at what the wealthy families spend on other activities, which again, like travel and stuff like that, you can see it's quite substantial, where those that have lesser means are spending very little on that. But what I really wanted to point your attention to is at the bottom here, you can see what the total expense spent by each income group in retirement. So roughly the very wealthy is spending about $100,000 a year on, which translates to about, say, $8,500 a month. And those of us that are not so well off are spending roughly about, say, $2,000 a month. So there's a wide distribution in what people would spend as they approach retirement. So you can pretty much figure out which of this income group you are and the kind of the average expenses you need to plan for when you're in retirement. By the way, these are all in today's dollars. Depending on when you're going to retire in the future, these numbers will be much higher or roughly around the same. So to figure out, well, how do people support themselves in retirement? Well, again, about 41%. Again, this is average. It's again often distorted by those that are very wealthy. About 41% of people support themselves. About 41% of the income they use to support themselves in retirement is actually from work. 50%, as you can see, comes from Social Security. Very little comes from investment, which is what we're going to speak about today. And the rest of it is very, very minimal. Be aware that even in retirement, you sometimes often have to pay taxes as well. So retirement doesn't exempt you from taxes, at least in some cases. And so that's a conversation we're going to have later on. But be aware that, again, only on average, about 50% of your expenses or the income you're going to have in retirement will come from Social Security. To see how that impacts people differently, take a look at the next slide. Again, you can see that those in the lower wage group, so it's the lower income group, they rely heavily on Social Security, but the amount they get on average is not a whole lot. And so there's, it's not only do they not get ahead when they're working, even in retirement, they're not going to get a whole lot, not just because of the way Social Security benefits are calculated. So on average, people that make less than $15,000 receive about $7,000 a year in Social Security benefit. People that make a lot of money still get a lot of Social Security benefit as well, even though for the most part, they might not necessarily need that money. So folks that make over $100,000 on average receive about $44,000 in Social Security benefit. That's in addition to the income they make from work, which is quite substantial. You can see compared to every other group, they make a lot of money. So the question is, who are these people, by the way, and how come they make so much money even in retirement? Well, the vast majority of those people are business owners. So they're not really retired per se. They still run their business. They still go to their businesses every day. They're in professions that allow them to continue to practice even into their 70s. For example, if you're an attorney, you can practice as long as you want. If you're an accountant, if you're a doctor, if you're most of these white collar businesses or professions, so to say, you can technically continue to practice way into your 70s. So those are the people that you'll find in this group. Now you can see once you go away from that group and you go into this other group.
Excuse me, Tunde, really quick. Sure. There was a hand from Mr. Brown.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you letting me ask it now while you're on this slide. So if they're retired, this is assuming they're retired, correct? At this point,
I would say they're claiming Social Security benefit, but they're not really retired. They're partially retired.
All right. Okay. Yep. Question asked and answered. Thanks. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean they're claiming the benefit, but they're still they own their businesses, right? So they might tell people I'm retired, right? Because they're like obviously getting Social Security benefit, but still go to their businesses, they go to their offices, they see what's going on there. They're mostly people that own businesses or are in professions that allow them to continue to work, even though technically they're claiming Social Security benefit as retired.
Thank you. The other question I had was about the housing. You said the higher income people spend more on housing, even in retirement, yes. But typically the higher income people, their homes are paid for. So I'm surprised on the last slide that the housing was higher, even for higher income people, that they're still paying.
You raised a very good question. Now, remember, you used to have mortgage interest deduction and property tax deduction. So for those people, that's just another way to kind of get some additional benefit of tax savings. So there's no point. They can afford to pay their mortgages, probably pay it all off, but they might just choose not to pay it off because they get tax savings from there.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Not a problem at all. Thanks a lot for the question. So what I really want to take your attention to, if you go all the way to the bottom, you can see the income of each group after tax. Notice that the very well off, obviously making a lot of money. Those of us that are not so well off, you can see the income on the annual basis, on an after-tax basis. And so you can kind of figure out where you lie in these groupings and see what, again, this is in today's dollar. In the future dollar, it may be significantly different from this. So now we know what each group on average makes. We know what each group on average spends. The next question is, well, are there gaps or are there surpluses, right? So what I've done in the next slide is to show you you can see the income. The first line here is the expenses on an annual basis for each group, right? And then the income on an after-tax basis for each group. So you can see again, for those that, if you factor in that the fact that the vast majority of these people are still working, notice that those in the high income are doing just fine. That's because they still get a lot of money from their work, so to say. Those that are not doing very well are those that are in lower income group. That's because most of these people work in industries where they can't really keep working beyond that 65 years of age. And so they, for the most part, stop working. And so those are the people that really have a gap between how much they need to spend in retirement and how much they have to spend in retirement. As a matter of fact, if we take out work income from every group, notice quickly that every group, even the very wealthy people, on average, also have a shortfall. And so that brings us to this question about, well, so what can I do, right? What can I do to address this question? What can I do as a person or as someone that's planning for retirement to address this question? Well, since a lot of us talk a lot about Social Security, right, as the primary source of income in retirement, let's spend a few minutes discussing how Social Security is actually works, right? Again, be aware it might require some I'm going to try to go through some of this because I'm kind of mindful of time. The first thing about Social Security is you have to be eligible for it. And to be eligible for Social Security, you have to be at least age 62 or older, disabled, or blind. And you must have earned enough credit to be insured, which means you have to have earned 40 credits. The assumption is that for each year of contribution towards Social Security, you get 4 credits. So you must have worked for at least 10 years and paid into Social Security for you to be eligible for Social Security. The disability credit is calculated a little bit differently. That's just, I don't want to sidetrack. So, but I can obviously be able to speak about that later on an individual basis. But that's calculated a little bit more complicated than this one. But for the most part, the eligibility is you have to have worked and paid into the system for at least 10 years. That's it. So who is eligible? Well, the person that is insured, the person's spouse. Again, there's a separate requirement for that as well to be eligible. If the person is no longer around, has passed away, the surviving spouse is also eligible. Again, there's a separate age and eligibility requirement. If the person is married, if the person has children that are unmarried, they're also eligible as well. If the person that's passed away has parents, they're also eligible as well. But again, each of those categories have a separate eligibility requirement that we're not going to discuss here. So that's just it. You really need to be at least 62 years or older. Now, for anyone born after 1963, the full age of, to get the full benefit, you can start getting benefit as early as 62. As you can see, that's why a lot of people just start claiming benefit. But to be eligible for full benefit, if you're born after 1963, you have to wait till you're 67. So again, as often most things most programs that is run by the government, the math is very complicated. But I'm going to try to explain it in a much more simple way. What you receive if you're eligible is called the primary insurance amount. That's what you're entitled to when you make a claim and you're eligible. How the primary insurance amount is calculated is based on something called your average index monthly wage. Put in a very simple way, they take your highest monthly income received over 35 years of work. So look at all the lifetime of all the years you've worked, and they take the highest monthly income you've earned over that 35 years period. The index is adjusted for inflation to bring it to whatever that current day's number is. And that's really what your primary insurance amount is based off. So they take that average index monthly wage, the first $1,024, you receive 90% of it. The next 1,000 to 6,000, you receive about 32% of it. And beyond that, you get 15%. Now, like I said earlier, you're eligible to receive benefit from when you turn 62. However, if you start claiming benefit early, they adjust it, they reduce it. That reduction is 5/9 times number of months. Again, don't ask me, I'm just a messenger. They take 5/9, multiply it by the number of months, and then they adjust your primary insurance amount by that number. So you essentially get less money. Now, like I said earlier, your family or your dependents are also eligible as well, but the calculation of that benefit is a little bit different, and we don't want to get into that. So here's an example of some. I said, just going to look at the person, Jane Doe. She was born on January 1st, 1970, currently earns $60,000, and she plans to retire in 14 years from now, 2035. And she'll be 65 years old by that time. So, and she's worked at least 35 years. So that means she's going to be able to get the full PI, primary insurance amount. Again, the date of birth is 1st of January, 1970. She'll be retiring at 65 years and 2 months. Be aware, our full retirement age is 67. So she's at least 22 months short of the full retirement age. So over that, 35 years, our estimated average monthly, average index monthly earnings will be $6,400. This is what our primary insurance amount will be based on. From that amount, she'll get $3,000. That's what she's been fully eligible for if she waited till 67. However, because she retired 22 months early, that number will be adjusted down to $2,600 a month. Now, our family, the total benefit she and our entire family will be eligible for is $5,383. Our alone is this amount. Let's just say she has a spouse, right? And the spouse also claims benefit based on our own income, then that spouse will also be eligible for some money. That amount, it's not in this calculation. But if you take our benefit, add it to our spouse benefit, and whatever else dependent that wants to claim benefit based on our income, that money cannot exceed $5,383. Now, be aware, this is based on what you will earn in 2035. If we adjust it down to today's dollar, it's actually about $1,700. So someone that earns $60,000 today and plans to retire approximately 14 years from now should be looking at roughly $2,600 of benefit, plus or minus some numbers, right? What $2,600 can buy you, 14 years from now is equivalent to what $1,700 can buy you today. Just going to give you an idea what that means. So if you have a mortgage that's about, say, $1,200, you see that once you pay your mortgage, you're not going to have a whole lot left to do all the things besides, maybe pay some bills here and there. And that's based on someone that earns $60,000 a year. So I'll take any questions that you might have.
The penalty is not as bad as I thought. 22 months is almost 2 years. She's retiring almost 2 years.
That's
early. But the penalty is from from 3,000
to about 2,600.
Yeah. So it's not as bad as I would have expected it to be for retiring 2 years early. It's almost worth it.
But you have to think about that. That's just $400 short for our entire life.
Yeah.
So it's not just 1 month. So in 1 year, that is $4,800. Over a 25 years, we're looking at least $100,000 or more.
Wow. Okay, you changed my mind.
Okay, but anyway, look, you have to make a choice of what works for you, right? It's not just about the money; it's about what makes you live a fulfilled life in retirement. So yeah, the penalty is very significant over time.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So when they talk about Social Security not being there for people that are younger, that are aging, how do you factor that in?
So thanks a lot for that question. That's more of a policy question, but if I have to speak from a personal point of view, Social Security is a sacred obligation. It's an obligation from one generation to the next generation. While it's highly unlikely that it would not be there, it would be there. The question is, to what extent would it, how generous would it be?
Right. Is there a possibility that there would be a reduction in benefit? Or that they change the formula for calculating how much you get per month?
That would be left. That was going to be up to the politicians at that time. How much they fear the voters, right? Which group of voters do they fear the most? Do they fear the retired voters, or do they fear the working voters? I think whichever group they feel like is more able to bear the cost of it, it's really where they're going to probably go look at. They'll have to go ask to bear additional burden. So unlikely they're going to go after retired people.
Hopefully.
Just to piggyback on that good
Yes.
question, they already changed it, right? Because retirement age used to be 65, now it's 67, right?
They've been moving it slowly. Yeah,
it could be 69 2 years from now. Is that?
That is a, but I think, again, for most people, you can see from the distribution of retiring, vast majority of people are already retired by 67. The idea of pushing it even further down, that it's just not tenable for most people. It's just not, because the vast majority of people that work in jobs that are manually demanding, physically demanding, they just can't be expected to work till 69. It's just not. It's not possible.
Well, I mean, if they can't, they may can't afford not to, based on these numbers, based on these depressing numbers you're showing.
Again, if I have to make a personal judgment, I think they'll more likely raise taxes or raise the cap, because right now, I don't know if you get the ones aware. If you're making $200,000 a year, which very well people will make, they don't pay taxes on the entire $200,000. They pay right now on the first $142,000. So the remaining $60,000 or so to say is exempt from Social Security tax. So my sense is that may be one easy way for them to kind of gather additional money by essentially taking the cap off it and say, look, every income from 0 to 1, whatever number it is, will be subject to Social Security taxes, so to say.
I have a question.
Sure.
So let's talk about the term retirement. A lot of people misuse that term. They will say they've retired in the sense of retired from work. And I have always understood, because my husband's in finances, that retirement means you're receiving a pension. And then there are those who retire and then go on to collect a second retirement or pension. So how do you define that term?
That's a good question. Retirement really depends on what. Look, a lot of people, retirement is psychological, right? It's not just about money. For most people, when they say they retire, they essentially tell you, look, it's time for me to kind of reap the reward of all the work I've done. So for a lot of them, they might still be doing some kind of work. But the fact that it's like they want to stay back or stand back and say, here, I've gathered all of this stuff. I've earned all of this stuff over my adult life. It's time for me to start getting something out of it. So yeah, they would get the pension and might still be working as well. Or they'll be getting, claiming Social Security and still be working as well. And that's perfectly fine. It's just really, other people say, look, I don't want to work at all, period, right? I want to just stay back and just wake up in the morning, not having to commute or go pick up a hammer or whatever it is. And again, honestly, it really depends on the kind of job and how much satisfaction you get from that job by the time you're in your 60s. For many people, they're just emotionally drained from the routine of 9 to 5, right? For other people, they just want the flexibility to work whenever they want to work. And for other people, they just don't want to stop working. They enjoy what they do so much that you cannot imagine life without it. But they still want that extra income because they believe they've earned it. And so they'll keep working nonstop. So it's really big. The retirement is the fluid term, depending on which group you're talking to. For the very wealthy people, it's really just about collecting everything they've gathered over time. For people that are working physically demanding work, it's really about, I got to stop this. I need to do something else and wake up at 5 o'clock and be out in the sun just working nonstop. So
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I won't be retiring.
Well, you're welcome to the club, I guess. So really, the focus is
I'm going to be a 2 pensioner.
And that's what some people do that, and that's perfectly fine as well. So let's quickly. I know we don't have much time left, but one of the things we want to do is to talk about what can you do to close the gap, right? And there is really 2 things you can do to close the gap. You can either plan to reduce your expenses in retirement, and we'll speak a little bit about what you can do, or plan to increase your income in retirement. And so what can you do to reduce your expenses? Well, try to reduce your fixed expenses by the time you retire. So if you can, try to pay off your mortgage by retirement. Try to eliminate all the kind of debt like car loan, student loan, any other consumer debt. Try to reduce those, because those things often come with fixed payment. And if you don't have to worry about making fixed payment every month, you get a lot off your mind. If you're thinking about healthcare costs, you may want to try maintaining healthy habits now. And if you're not been practicing one, it's probably time to start imbibing those healthy habits, maybe walking, little exercise, whatever it is you think that would help improve your health outcomes for you. You can start prepaying for long-term healthcare. For some of us have high deductible healthcare plans. You usually have a high health savings account attached to it. By the way, that health savings account, you don't have to use the money up every year. You can keep it and you use that money in retirement. So if you have a health savings account and you don't use up all the money in 1 year, don't be in a rush to spend it. Keep adding more to it. That money can be used to cover healthcare expenses in retirement as well. Think about downsizing, right? Maybe you live in a 5-bedroom house, 6,000 square foot. Perhaps when all the kids are gone to college and they're not, they only come home for Thanksgiving or Christmas, maybe you want to think about downsizing, from your, the house, the big cars to a smaller car that's more manageable, or think about relocating to a low cost or retirement favorable state, because some states actually tax retirement income, other states do not. And so any money you don't have to pay in taxes is money you can spend. So you might think about, maybe I want to move to a state that doesn't tax retirement income. Think about just your lifestyle. If right now as I work, I have all kind of, if I have all kind of expensive habits, maybe you might think about, well, what else can I use to replace those habits in retirement? Habits that require me to spend a lot of money. Maybe I want to replace those habits, those lifestyle with other things that that doesn't really cost me to enjoy, so to say. So in terms of like, what can I do with respect to increasing income? Well, like we said earlier, you can either delay retirement for a few years. That would help you net additional money for those that are able to do that. Or you can think about partial retirement, right? I'm not going to fully retire. I'm going to keep working and maybe not work as much as I used to, so that at least I can get income to support myself. Or, and we're going to spend the next few minutes on, I can start increasing my asset right now so I can prepare those assets for retirement. So let's talk about that funding gap we saw earlier, right? For each of those funding gap, what I show you in this table is the amount of retirement assets you need to have based on today's dollar to cover that gap. So let's just say you're in the $40,000 to $49,000 income group. You need roughly about, if you're working, you need about $81,000 or $82,000 to cover that gap in retirement. That doesn't mean you're still working. If you don't plan to work at all, you need roughly about $290,000 or so. I'm just rounding up to the next zero. And that might sound like a lot of money, right? The reality is that if you don't need $1 million to retire. You just need about 20 to 25 times what your income would be to support that lifestyle in retirement. So this might look like a lot of money to gather, but if you start early, let's just say someone that's 40 right now, right? And wants to plan to retire at 65, to cover that gap, without working at all, you need to put away about $485 every month. Now you might say, well, that's still a lot of money. Well, if you put that money in an employer-sponsored plan, right? If your employer has, say, some kind of a 401k or 403b, you may only need to contribute about half of that on a monthly basis. So maybe all you need to put away in your employer's retirement plan will be somewhere around, say, $250 to $300 a month. So it is doable. It's just a matter of starting early. The longer you wait to start, this number will go higher. If you wait till you're 45, you might have to put away $600. If you're 50, you might be like over $1,000. And so early makes things much easier to do.
Excuse me, Tunde.
Mm-hmm.
What if my company doesn't offer a retirement plan, and I want to start investing tomorrow?
That's a good question. Again, I'm going to get to that in 1 second. So again, if your employer offers your retirement plan, which a lot of employers do, so think about, again, putting in the matching percentage. If your employer matches 5%, put out that 5%. For most people, it's within the reasonable range, right? That if your employer is matching up to, say, 5%, and that 5% is, say, $200,000 to $3,000 a year, that comes to about $250 a month. It's quite doable. So for those that don't have an employer-sponsored plan, the next option is to do something by yourself. It's called an individual plan, right? There's still qualified plan. That will be an IRA. That's called individual retirement account. There's also another version of that is called a Roth IRA. The difference in the two is that the IRA, whatever money you put into it is tax deductible. In the Roth IRA, your contribution is not tax deductible. However, when you withdraw the money in the future, you'll be able to withdraw the money without paying taxes. As long as you start withdrawing after you're 59 and a half years old and you've held the money in the account for at least 5 years. Now, if you decide to pursue the IRA path, either Roth or the traditional IRA, just be aware that most investments tend to behave the same way. The only thing that tends to vary is more the fees. So keep an eye on the fees that the company that's providing that service for you is charging. Again, please don't invest all your money in one stock. It's really not the best way to invest. Try to put money in a mutual fund. If you're below 40, it's okay to just invest all your money in stocks. Once you go above 40, start thinking about putting some of your money into bonds. So I know I don't have much time left, so I'm going to try to cover a couple more and just kind of reiterate some of the things that I said. Again, if you're going with your employer plan, just the reason we stress making that matching contribution is that you get instant return. That return could be as much as 100% if your employer matches the full amount. again, whatever you put into your employer plan is usually tax exempt. So it's money that doesn't even get taxed at all. And that's good for you because that allows the money to grow much more quickly. Most employer plans will provide you different options. So you don't have to go around searching for investments yourself. Most of the investments that are in your employer plan are already screened. And most employer plans will provide some kind of customer service or someone to provide advice if you need one for free, which is very helpful. Now, if your employer doesn't provide one, like I said, you can use the IRA option if you think you're going to be in a lower tax bracket when you retire, or you can use the Roth IRA if you think you'll be in a higher tax bracket when you retire. Most of us will be in a lower tax bracket. Again, if you're going to go IRA, look for discount brokers. They're usually cheaper, like TD Ameritrade, E-Trade, Vanguard, Fidelity, Charles Schwab. Again, start with just mutual funds. They're cheaper, they don't cost that much, and they usually provide more diversification. Now, the reason I keep stressing that you need to start early is because, you see, if you look at the way stock market behaves, notice that this is the last 20-something years or so. There are a few years in which the market actually has negative, loses money. But there are a few years in which the return is super, which is like 30% return, followed by 20. But if you look at those years don't occur every time. They occur a few times every decade. And if you miss out those years, more likely your performance of your money would be much lower. So when it comes to investment, time is really your best friend. And it could also be your worst enemy if you wait too long before you start investing. Now, people say, well, I'm not really very familiar with investing. What other things can I do, right? Well, there are other things you can do besides just investing in mutual funds and stuff like that. Some people may be real estate, right? They might think about buying a property and owning that property until they retire. That's another option. You can, if you buy an investment property and you rent it out, and hopefully the renters the money you receive from the rent, as long as the rent is more than the mortgage, will go help you in paying down the mortgage over time. So hopefully by the time you retire, you can then either sell the house or continue to receive the income for the rent. So that'll be supplemental income for you in retirement, right? Another option is to say, well, think about, again, starting a business when you retire. Some of us have creative hobbies. You can convert that into a paid work, or you can do seasonal work. And there's a lot of seasonal work that's out there. Some folks might say, well, you know what, if I have a life insurance, particularly if you have a whole life insurance, you might think about cashing it out if you don't have anyone that you think would need it anymore. It's another option as well. But again, whole life insurance is more expensive. You're probably better off just putting your money in an investment rather than investing in a life insurance plan. And the very last resort, some people might have to rely on the equity in their home. And that's what's through a reverse mortgage. Now, just be aware, there is some issues with reverse mortgage. The way it works is that a lender will pay you monthly income. Essentially, they're giving you a loan against the equity in your home. Now, that loan becomes due upon the death of that person. So if you have received maybe 40,000 or 50, whatever that number is, upon the death of that person, the person's survivor or heir would have to either pay off the loan or sell the house and use the proceeds of the house to pay off the loan. So again, it's very risky, right? Because it's really a loan, it's not free money. And the equity in your house is really what you're pledging against the loan. It's almost like home equity line of credit or home equity loan. The only difference is that they're paying you that money on a monthly basis. So it's kind of a steady stream of income, which becomes due upon the death of the homeowner. So there are other ways to kind of cover that gap. It's really have to choose which one works best for you. I have a few more minutes. So I want to just keep that few minutes to take additional questions that you might have. Again, thank you so much for listening in, I guess, to say.
Thank you, Dr. Odusami. So we have literally 1 minute left. So feel free to unmute yourselves, guys, if you have any questions while we have this expert with us. Let's take advantage of it. And thank you guys for your questions. They were awesome.
Yes.
This is Ed Brown. I did find the presentation extremely valuable, so much so that I had asked Rhonda for a copy of the slides. I would love a copy of them so I can review them later. And now you put your email address on the screen. I will certainly email you, after I do my own personal plan, or fine tune my personal plan, I should say. I would love to pick your brain. So hopefully we can get a copy of these slides so I can refer to it later.
Not a problem. I'd be happy to do so.
Yeah. So, as always, when we have a parent information night, I will send you guys a thank you email. I will include Dr. Odusami's email address and any resources that he has to share with us. So, and I also want to say on behalf of our superintendent who was with us earlier, but now he's tending to a family obligation. I think he's at one of his kids' games. That we thank you guys for coming out. Our intent is to make sure that we provide just a plethora of information, different types of information for families to support your success in the district, because we know when families are supported, then our students are happy. And we don't just want to talk about academics and student behavior all the time. We know that these things provide the resources for parents to be happy and feel supported and secure. And so our children come to school happy, supported, and secure. So thank you guys for coming out. If there are no other questions, we will end our event for this evening. And thank you so much, Dr. Odusami.
Thank you, everyone.
Widener University as well.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Thank you, Aranda. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.